The sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the dry land in a golden color. Thomas Grady stood outside his small cabin, feeling the cool wind brush against his face. He had been alone for many years, ever since his wife passed away from sickness. His cabin stood miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by wild grass, a few tall pines, and the sound of silence that only lonely men could know. The only thing that kept him busy was his small garden behind the cabin. He grew corn, beans, squash, and a few tomatoes. That garden was his comfort. Every morning he watered the plants and thanked the earth for giving him something to care for. But this morning felt different. When he reached the garden, he stopped in surprise. The wooden fence was broken in one place, as if someone had climbed over it. The ground looked disturbed and several plants were crushed. Half of the vegetables were gone. At first he thought maybe an animal had come during the night, a hungry deer or maybe a coyote. But then he saw something that made him frown. There were footprints, small and light, almost like a woman's. He leaned closer and noticed a small piece of cloth stuck on the fence wire. It wasn't animal fur, it was torn fabric. Someone had stolen from his garden. Thomas straightened up, his eyes scanning the trees nearby. The trail was clear enough to follow. He picked up his hat, placed it on his head, and began to walk. The ground was dry and covered in leaves, but the footprints were easy to see. He followed them for about 10 minutes, moving quietly. The morning sun was bright now, and in the distance he saw movement. Behind a large rock, someone crouched low, holding something close to the chest. Thomas stepped closer, careful not to make noise. Then he saw her, a young woman, thin and tired, clutching a few of his vegetables. Her face was dirty, her clothes torn, and her eyes wide with fear. Her hair was long and dark, and she looked like she hadn't eaten properly in days. When she saw Thomas, she froze like a scared animal. Her hands shook and the vegetables dropped to the ground. For a moment, they both stood in silence, looking at each other. Thomas didn't speak at first. He was shocked but also curious. She didn't look like a thief. She looked like someone desperate. Finally, she whispered in a weak voice, "I can serve you if you spare my life." Her voice trembled as she said it. The words carried both fear and hope. Thomas realized then that she was Apache. Her accent was soft, but her eyes said more than words ever could. She was starving and afraid of dying. "I'm not going to hurt you," Thomas said in a calm tone. His voice was rough from years of silence, but it carried kindness. The woman didn't move. Her breathing was fast, and she kept her eyes low. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said softly, "Naomi." Thomas nodded. "Naomi, why did you take from my garden?" She looked ashamed. "I was hungry," she said. "I saw food and thought no one lived here." Thomas sighed. He looked at the broken fence again and then at her. The girl was thin as a stick. It was clear she hadn't eaten for days. "You could have just knocked," he said gently. "I thought you would shoot," she whispered, her eyes still on the ground. "Men shoot when they see Apache." Her words made him pause. He knew there was truth in them. Many men did not show mercy to her people. Thomas looked around the quiet land, then back at her tired face. "Come with me," he said. "You'll eat first, then we'll talk." Naomi's eyes widened in surprise. "You'll not chain me?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "I don't keep chains." She followed him carefully, keeping a few steps behind, her legs trembling from weakness. When they reached the cabin, he brought out a chair and asked her to sit on the porch. Then he went inside, took a jug of water, and handed it to her. She drank fast, so fast that some spilled on her clothes. Thomas filled the jug again and gave her more. Then he brought out a plate with some bread and beans left from last night's dinner. She ate in silence, every bite slow but thankful. When she finished, Thomas asked softly, "Where are your people?" Naomi looked down at her hands. "Gone," she said. "Some taken by soldiers. Others ran away. I walked for many days. No food, no fire. When I saw your garden, I thought maybe I can live one more day." Thomas listened quietly. He knew she was telling the truth. Life was harsh on the frontier, even for white settlers. For her, it was 10 times harder. He could have sent her away or turned her in, but something inside him refused. He saw not a thief, but a woman who had lost everything. "You can stay a few days," he said. "You'll help around here until you're strong again. Then you can go." Naomi looked up with disbelief. "You trust me?" "I trust hunger," he replied simply. "It makes people do what they must." That night, Thomas gave her an old blanket and let her sleep on the porch near the door. The stars were bright above, and the air was cool. Naomi lay still for a long time, watching the firelight through the window. She could hear Thomas moving inside. She felt safe for the first time in weeks. Before closing her eyes, she whispered softly, "Thank you." Thomas didn't answer, but he heard her words. He sat by the fire thinking. He had not shared his home or food with anyone since his wife died. The silence that once comforted him now felt strange. He wondered why he didn't send the woman away. Maybe because he saw pain in her eyes that matched his own. The next morning, Thomas woke early and stepped outside. He was surprised to see Naomi already awake, sweeping the porch with a broken broom she had found behind the house. She had washed her face and her dark hair was neatly braided. When she saw him, she stopped and said, "Good morning." "You don't have to do that," Thomas said. "You said I help," she replied simply. He nodded and walked to the barn. All day, Naomi worked without rest. She fed the chickens, carried water from the stream, and mended old sacks. She moved slowly, still weak, but she worked with quiet dignity. When Thomas asked how she knew how to fix things, she smiled faintly. "My father taught me. He said wooden hands can speak if you listen." Her calmness surprised him. There was strength in her, hidden beneath the hunger. A few days later, she repaired the broken fence in the garden, tying it carefully with rope. When Thomas saw her working, he said, "You don't have to do all that." She looked at him and said softly, "The garden gave me life. I give it back." Those words touched him more than he wanted to admit. Each evening they sat near the porch as the sun went down. Thomas would drink his coffee and Naomi would hum old songs from her childhood. The air between them was quiet but peaceful. One night she spoke suddenly. "When I came here, I thought I would die. I prayed to the sky for mercy. I did not think a man would answer." Thomas looked at the horizon, the colors fading into night. "Mercy is hard to find these days," he said. "But maybe that's why it matters." Naomi smiled faintly, her eyes shining in the firelight. "Maybe," she said softly. That night, Thomas gave her a place inside the cabin to sleep near the warm fire. The wind outside grew strong and the walls creaked. She sat close to the flames, her face calm. "You saved me," she said quietly. Thomas looked at her and replied, "No, I just gave food. You saved yourself by not giving up." She looked into the fire for a long time, thinking of all the days she had fought just to live. Outside, the land was still and cold. Inside the small cabin, two lonely souls found something neither expected: peace. Thomas, who thought his heart had turned to stone after losing his wife, felt a small spark return. Naomi, who had lost her people and her hope, began to believe that kindness still existed in the world. That night, as the fire burned low, both fell asleep. He in his chair, she near the hearth. The wind whispered softly against the cabin walls, carrying the promise of a new beginning neither of them could yet see. Morning light filled the cabin, touching the wooden walls with soft gold. Thomas woke to the sound of quiet movement near the fire. Naomi was already awake, folding the blanket she had used and tidying the small space. She moved carefully, almost silently, as if afraid to disturb the peace. When she noticed him watching, she smiled shyly. "You wake early," she said. Thomas rubbed his eyes and smiled back faintly. "You wake earlier," he replied. She laughed softly, a sound he had not heard before. It was light, almost musical, and for the first time he realized how much that cabin had missed laughter. The days that followed felt calmer. Naomi helped with everything. She cooked, gathered wood, and took care of the animals. She even taught Thomas how to prepare simple herbs for medicine when his hands ached from work. Each day brought small changes. Thomas found himself talking more than he had in years. He told her about his wife, about how the sickness had taken her too soon, and how the silence after her death had been unbearable. Naomi listened without interrupting. Sometimes she would look at him with soft eyes and say, "Your heart is kind, but it forgot to feel warmth. Maybe now it remembers." Thomas didn't know what to say to that. But when he looked at her, he felt something gentle stirring inside, a kind of peace that had nothing to do with words. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered in the distance. The wind began to howl through the trees and soon rain poured down like a curtain. The two of them hurried to bring the chickens inside the barn. By the time they finished, both were drenched. Naomi laughed as the water dripped from her hair. and Thomas couldn't help but laugh too. For a brief moment they stood there in the rain, two lonely people who had somehow found joy again. When they returned to the cabin, Thomas gave her a dry blanket and lit the fire. Naomi sat close to the warmth, her hair still damp but her eyes bright. "I had forgotten what it feels like to laugh," she said quietly. Thomas poured her a cup of warm tea. "Then you should laugh more often," he said. "It sounds good in this house." The rain lasted for 2 days. During that time, they spoke more than ever. Naomi told him stories of her childhood, how her father had taught her to ride horses and how her mother used to sing when the stars came out. Her tribe had been peaceful, living close to the land. When soldiers came, they lost everything, but she said she still dreamed of her home sometimes when she closed her eyes. Thomas listened carefully, never judging, never interrupting. He realized how strong she truly was. Even after losing her world, she still believed in kindness. He thought about all the people he had met who gave up after losing less. She was different. When the storm ended, the sky cleared into a deep blue. The land looked washed clean. Naomi stepped outside barefoot, feeling the wet earth under her feet. "The world smells new," she said. Thomas stood beside her, watching her smile at the sky. It had been a long time since he had seen anyone look at life that way. From then on, they worked side by side. She helped him plant new seeds, patch the roof, and even build a small pen for a new goat he traded for in town. People in the town noticed Thomas seemed different now, more alive, less quiet. He didn't talk about Naomi to many people, but those who came by his cabin could see someone had brought light back into the place. One morning, when Thomas returned from the woods with firewood, he found Naomi standing by the river near the house. She was washing clothes, her sleeves rolled up, her reflection rippling in the water. He watched quietly for a while before saying, "You've made this place feel like home again." Naomi turned and smiled. It was already a home. It just needed voices again. Her answer touched him deeply. That evening he made stew and insisted she sit while he cooked. She laughed and said she had never seen a man cook before. "Well," Thomas said, stirring the pot, "you've met one now." They ate together by the fire, and when she tasted the food, she smiled and said softly, "It tastes like peace." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The garden flourished more than ever. The hens laid more eggs, and even the air around the cabin felt different, lighter, warmer, almost like a new season of life had come. Naomi often sang while she worked, and Thomas would pause just to listen. Sometimes she would catch him watching her, and he'd look away quickly, pretending to fix something. She would smile to herself, understanding more than he realized. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Thomas noticed Naomi sitting outside with her small handmade necklace of wooden beads. She was turning them slowly in her hands, lost in thought. He sat down beside her. "You look far away," he said. She nodded. "Sometimes I still think of my people. I wonder if any of them survived. But maybe this is where I was meant to end up." Thomas looked at her gently. "You've made a home here. You don't have to wander anymore." Naomi's eyes glistened in the fading light. "Do you really mean that?" "I do," he said quietly. "You've worked harder than anyone I've known. You've brought life back to this place. I can't imagine it without you now." She looked at him, silent for a long moment, then smiled softly. "Then I'll stay as long as you want me to." He nodded. "I'd like that," he said. That night they sat by the fire again, watching the flames dance. The cabin, once filled with loneliness, now felt alive. Naomi fixed a tear in his old coat while he whittled a small wooden spoon for her. The little things they did for each other filled the days with quiet meaning. As the seasons changed, their bond grew even deeper. They didn't speak of the future much, but both understood it without saying a word. Naomi had brought something to Thomas's life that he thought he'd lost forever: hope. And Thomas had given Naomi something she never had before: safety. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas found her standing by the garden, holding a small sprout in her hand. "It grew from the seeds I planted that first day," she said softly. "The garden gave me food when I was starving, and now it gives me peace." Thomas looked at her, his heart full. "You've done more for this land than I ever could," he said. "You gave it a reason to live again." Naomi looked up at him. "We both did," she said simply. They stood together as the morning sun warmed their faces. Neither spoke for a while because words were no longer needed. In that moment, they both knew that mercy had turned into companionship. and companionship had turned into something much deeper, something that didn't need names or promises. That night, as the fire flickered low, Naomi whispered softly, "You saved my life." "Thomas," he looked at her kindly. "You saved mine too, Naomi," he said, "only in a different way." The wind moved through the trees, gentle and calm, and the stars shone brightly above the quiet land. Inside that small wooden cabin, two hearts that had once been empty were full again. The man who had lived alone and the woman who had begged for mercy had found something greater than either expected, a second chance at life, and from that day on, no one ever called Naomi a thief again. The garden she once stole from became her own. The man she had feared became her friend, her family, her home. Together they lived in peace, tending the soil, watching the seasons come and go, and thanking the heavens that kindness had brought them together on that fateful morning when mercy changed both their lives forever.